Today we are joined by Zach Gropper, the CEO of Inside Revenue, a firm working hands-on with the B2B companies to diagnose and fix revenue execution. Zach operates where the strategy meets reality, messy pipelines, misaligned teams, unclear ownership, and growth targets that look great on slides but break in practice. That looks very, very familiar. So I'm happy to have you on, Zach. Welcome on the pod.
Hey guys, great to be here.
So yeah, let's dive in. We want to hear your story. How did you end up building the Inside Revenue, and what was the trigger moment that prompted you to build this company and your own approach?
Yeah, I think I'll try not to tell too boring a long story, but actually there's a long history to why, we built Insight Revenue in the first place. I think like most founding stories, it's the convergence of a problem that you see in the market that you feel you can solve better, and then just a passion for, a topic that you really invested in. And so I mean, the Insight Revenue story probably arguably started around 2000, like 20 years ago, 2006. I actually joined a company called Corporate Executive Board, which some people have heard of. Many people have heard of Gartner, who acquired them years later. And so the CEB team, I was asked to join their professional services arm, where they were actually told. So we had the widest body of research and data on functional excellence. So if you think of Gartner's model today, Gartner at the time was mostly focused on tech and supply chain. We were focused on HR, sales, marketing, et cetera. Every function of the corporate suite. I joined the company when the sales side of the business had clients saying, "You're doing the most amazing research in the world, but when we try to implement that work, you don't have a team to help me. And we're taking your research, your best practices to other consultants, and they're saying that they can do it, and they've never seen them before. And so we're wasting a lot of time and money." So they asked us to build a professional services arm to take the science of B2B go to market and actually be able to drive change in individual organizations, right? So move from a membership to more like a consulting model. And so that was a really cool place to join. And about 20 years ago, it was just, we were founding that business. And a lot of people have heard of that business today because several years in, we started stumbling into research around what drives customer loyalty and purchasing decisions that became very famous. And then also what drives high performance in B2B sales. And so a lot of people have heard of the Challenger sale, the Challenger customer, the books. Before the books, there was a big research team putting that work together. And then there was our teams in the consulting side of the business trying to figure out how does a company actually deliver on these great concepts and ideas. If I work for Waste Management or Coca-Cola or Google, how is it different for me? And so we spent many years making a lot of mistakes, but doing a lot of cool work and figuring out and building one of probably the best B2B performance businesses on earth. And over that time, I learned a hell of a lot. We implemented with about 1,000 companies these models. Obviously, the Challenger, model for sales reps is probably the most famous work that came out of that. Fast forward to today, 1,000 companies later, having worked with a number of us along those years, actually decided, hey, what could this business have been if we actually had more flexibility and ability to get in deeper with clients? And so at some point, that business became part of Gartner, got sold to private equity, then got resold to another training firm. And we felt like, hey, let's be less about valuation in a business, and let's be more about how can we actually bring more of consultative lens, be able to adapt our work to actually get customers not just into the river, but out the other side. So a lot of companies out there say, "Yay, we're challenger companies, send out the book." But actually, how many people are delivering on that best practice customer experience, actually delivering those skills and operating with the right processes every day? It's hard, and change is hard. Behavior change is hard. So we built a business. My co-founder today, Timur Hisilmaz, was the head of research at CEB, Gartner Challenger. So all the work behind those books, 90% of what Gartner has today was his work. And I was out there selling, building teams, and running basically everything outside the US for that business and figuring out what does it take to take these things into all different shapes and sizes of companies, different industries, different regions of the world. And a number of us actually felt like, hey, we could probably do this a lot better now if we get the band back together and actually do some more research, do some more learning, and go out and help companies. So about 3 years ago, we formed Insight Revenue. It's kind of, we feel like it's the next several chapters of that story, and we go much deeper with clients to actually drive this outcome. So again, long-winded story, but like it's been 20 years of my life poured into bringing this business to life.
No, I love it. I mean, I love the story actually, how you were growing with this very mature business or maturing consulting business, and then you started to take this into the other areas. And so, actually, I have a follow up question on exactly that part. How did you feel about taking this from the Coca Colas of the world, and getting this into like a smaller companies or startups companies that are trying to build their presence and fight on this kind of on this crowded market in their own category.
Yeah, I love that question because I had the same exact question when I during COVID, I left that world, and I wanted to work with a team that was closer to home. I'm actually based in Barcelona for those listening again. That's the other side of the world from these guys. And it was been a long time of traveling around the world, working with different organizations. But we all remember those days. We had a long lockdown here, and so I took a look at. I got introduced to a company called AirDNA. At CEB Gartner, we started working with the Fortune, 500, the biggest companies on earth, and eventually we started coming down. We used to call middle market any company that was less than a billion revenue. So times how they have changed, right? And so what I did, when I joined this company, this company AirDNA, they were a U.S. company. Maybe you guys have heard of them. They cornered the market on data for the short-term rental industry, which was kind of a not that well-known industry going into COVID, but a really interesting industry that was emerging. And Airbnb was obviously the known company. And so, they had asked me to come in and try to help them scale and sell that business. And so for me, having worked with all these other different kinds of companies and built and scaled a business within, CB and Gartner, it was a really interesting challenge to say, "Okay, I'm not coming in with my teams that used to implement and trainers and coaches and consultants. Coming in myself as as the leader of the B2B business there, like, how can I turn this thing around?" And I give full credit. In a year, we completely we sold the business in a year after I got there. A big part of that was obviously they have a B2 prosumer side, and I was looking at the B2B side. And we took that business from about 4 to 10 million in that period of time on the B2B side. And it was really running the playbook I learned all those years. And I had no idea how it was going to work. I took a B2C marketing team and talking to them about B2B, messaging, and they were excited to just learn and help out. And so we were a ragtag group of a bootstrap startup, but with great team, great product, and the stuff was like wildfire. So we overnight kind of, we tripled our volume of meetings. We, doubled pretty quickly. We doubled our ARR on a lot of our key segments, running a lot of the plays that we had run with clients around the world like Google and Siemens, and they worked. So that was a big aha moment for me where it's like, wow, like it's not only just as important for smaller companies to do these best practices, but it can work so much faster because you don't have fiefdoms and silos and all this red tape. You could just grab people in a room and come up with a strategy and go try it out with customer segment. And it was just phenomenal. And I love that team and love that experience. And so that was one of the reasons I was like, hey, I've now had more than a couple exits under my belt. I don't have an excuse not to go and do this thing. And also, like, wow, this can really help out all shapes and sizes of companies. And so, not just ones that can sign up with Gartner or for these other players. Like, we wanted to build something where we could help everybody. And so, that's still part of the vision is trying to find ways that startups, scale ups, and we work with a lot of large enterprise companies today have a model that works for them and can benefit from all this great insight.
Well, that's actually a great story. I feel like when you're working with a large enterprise business or even mature business, it's a very different game than when you're working with a startup that has the shining penny, an object as a product, that is trying to go against these incumbents. The first one often is about the optimization or restructuring, even though people don't call it that way, but in fact, that's what it is. And on the other hand, when you're working with a unexperienced team, it's all about educating the team. What are the options, and also choose the path that is helping to scale. And the scale is the objective, right? Because if you don't scale fast or fairly fast, with the predictable pace, eventually you're gonna be gone, right? You're gonna get swallowed by somebody else, or you're gonna eventually get replicated by somebody else. So I think extremely important that consultants like you are recognizing the fact that some of these tactics that were fairly successful or very successful could be adjusted and tailored to these objectives as well, right? Um, so when you engaging with the customers, who is your typical contact person? Where do you start?
Yeah, for our business, it depends on size of organization, but even for our large customers, typically it's the chief sales officer, chief revenue officer who has a strategic change or pivot they want to make with that business. And obviously, that's ideal that we're talking to the people who are in charge of the strategy. Obviously, we work with a lot of folks across the organization, sales enablement. A lot of our work ends up getting deep into coaching, training, messaging, this kind of work. And so we engage with those different teams as well, RevOps, et cetera. But yeah, normally for the type of work we do, it's not like, hey, we've got our team says they discount too much, so let's try to do a negotiation training and see in 2 hours if we can fix the problem. A lot of what we're being brought in to do is to really look at, we're making a pivot from product to platform, or we've added AI, in addition to whether it's services or hardware, and we're trying to change the nature of our relationship, and get in deeper with customers. And then it's like, well, how are you going to actually get the customer to make the change as well as your teams to make the change? And then the bigger the organization, then the more alignment problems, like you mentioned, you're going to have. But even small organizations, I mean, I'm not going to name companies, but I've worked, even the smallest organizations, startups, I've in a huge community of startups and founders. It's amazing. Even when you get to like 10 people, you start to have those silos and those battles between people. Marketing is going one way and sales is going the other way, and RevOps isn't really RevOps, even they're calling it RevOps. And then meanwhile, the founder just decides like they have an idea and they just go do it with product, right? So having seen all those challenges, obviously we like to be invited in at the most strategic level possible, and then actually become like kind of an outsource. We think of ourselves much more of a outsourced team that like blends into their internal team to actually go farther and faster and build out that internal capability.
I think it's a good way to put it. How you defining your team. I mean, Ron and I, we had a similar conversation, and we said this the same way. Um, that's where the future of the workforce is, especially in the go-to-market space. But speaking about a misalignment, I have actually a question for you. What is the most common reason that you discover engaging with these accounts that tells you that answers the question why they're underperforming?
The most common gap that they have that's leading to
Yes,
underperformance?
yes.
Uh, and I think it's the generally it's the lack of translation. I could pick 2 answers. One answer would be, I mean, you have these conversations over the last few years. I've had a lot of these conversations where it's like we're increasing the numbers, um, and we're changing actually the comp plans, and we're going to throttle the organization harder because we need to sell more. It's like, okay, great. And then they're like, but our front end of the funnel it has nobody, like it's emptying. We're losing leads. It's like, okay, so how are you going to get enough at bats with the team that you have? And how are you then going to increase conversion rate to meet these targets that somehow have been handed down to the sales organization? And there's no way to do the math. It's all just like, well, we're going to send more emails, or we're going to automate this and that, or AI SDR. And like you can already watch and see, like, no, that they're going off the cliff, right? There's no way, like, half will get fired, they're gonna reduce cost, and then maybe they'll figure it out later. But that's a common thing around just folks having a big pipeline problem. I think the one that's more like the more strategic problem that I see all sizes of organizations have is they plant a flag for their strategy, that's not based on what the customers actually are telling them that they want or need. And you could argue those are different things, but you see a lot of companies saying, we need a capital efficient growth strategy. We are not differentiating. We see our moat going away. So we're acquiring companies, we're building out capabilities, we're putting AI into things. So we're now going to be able to, get sell bigger deals and also, so when am I going blurry here? We're gonna be able to sell bigger deals, or get in deeper, like the kinds of things where it's like, okay, we get it. Like if you sell this deal, it's gonna be more profitable for you and better for you. Then you go out and look what the clients are dealing with, and it's like their world is completely different. We worked. There's one company I was working with that acquired like 20 other different companies to have all these capabilities, and they just told their team like, just go sell the whole thing to all your clients. They might have bought one or two things, but why shouldn't they buy everything? And 50, 60% of those clients, you just know, like, they're not gonna be ready for that. They're not gonna do it. They can't afford it. Like, their status quo is so far away from that ideal. So you start getting into this idea of like, I don't think people understand customers' readiness. They don't understand their fit. And then because of that, they completely lose credibility with the client when they're pitching them innovation, when they're like, you clearly have no idea like what is going on in my world. And so then what happens in those organizations is the CROs get fired 12 to 16 months after that strategy, right? And a lot of times it's driven from the board or from the investors, and nobody knows how to translate that. And so inevitably it's going to fail because it's not built on true product market fit. And you also, even in the case you don't have a great, like you can improve what you're doing if you actually give the playbook to the team to execute it. But very often it's that playbook is built on an internal process. It's built on Medic and MedPick or something, and it still doesn't solve the problem, which is the other side of the table, right?
Yeah, I think Medpic is it's not a strategy, right? It's just a flow essentially and a structure around something. But if you to your point, if you don't solve these basics and you don't have a product market fit, I would argue that's not a doesn't you don't have a strategy in general.
Yeah, it's a
Like
strategy problem.
it's like a it's exactly. So you need to ensure that this is somewhat cohesive and makes sense. And like you said, I agree 100%. You have to have some form of indication or some level of indication from your customers and the buyers that that's how they want to buy, they want to buy that, right? It's almost impossible to operationalize something that is just wrong from the beginning. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you can do the patchwork here and there, right? You might have some illusion that it's going to work, but it won't give you the results that you're expecting.
Yeah, obviously there are companies with enough resources that can build a market, right? We can drive the market there, but most companies are not in that position, and so you know that's not a great. It's not a great situation for a sales leader to be in. To and this is where I know there's a lot of people going in. This happened last year and the year before, and I know it's going to happen this year, where there's sales leaders I'm already talking to who know they're not going to hit their 2026 targets. And like, how do you like that? There's no mojo in that culture in that you're like if you already know and the top of the pyramid already knows that like that's it's a different if it's a different time these last few years, especially in a lot of tech and SaaS companies where there's a lot of leaders who just don't believe they're going to hit target, and somehow that's actually I think the majority.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's a good segue. I'd love to get your sense of that problem, right? So you walk into, a new engagement and someone tells you, I'm not going to hit my number, right? So tell me how you kind of assess what the real problem is and determine, how to even go solve it, right? So determine the problem and then go figure out how to help that team. I'd love you to address that specific scenario since you're seeing it so much. I think that's a great one to dive into. And then more maybe a general framework you use to kind of assess what the problem is and then go dive in without giving up IP.
I think there's I mean, and I know
No, please share, please share, please share.
you
Yeah,
guys are
share it all, right? I'm taking good notes, copious notes.
It's not, there's, yeah, I don't think there's any secret or magic wands. Obviously, there's a lot of consultants and a lot of RevOps experts who know this stuff way better than me that are diving deep into pipeline analysis and using revenue intelligence tools to like look at like why are there gaps, where are the gaps in the data and the system, and obviously that's really important. But I think the key question is when you look at a win loss analysis, how well do you truly understand it? For example, how many deals do you have that are actually no decision? Is one of the first things that you look at. So if why and on average it's like 50%, right? It's like, well, we don't know. And then you have to argue like it was it actually a no decision or you just don't
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
happened?
yeah. They're bullshitting you, right? Like they're giving us like a, you know, yeah. It's right. I would argue it's probably 60%. That's where I would feel it's the right number.
60? Yeah, I mean, that's and so, and there's a great my colleague Matt Dixon wrote a book called The Jolt Effect, which looked at indecision in general, and they guess it's 40 to 60% on average. And I see it still. I think it's actually getting worse, especially with all the stuff you can't control, which like policy, tariff, like indecision that's making people unable to plan ahead because of policy is a slightly different issue, but it's conflating the same issue, which is first of all, if you go back and you have all these deals are stuck, then it's not necessarily just a forecasting problem. It's a lack of customer understanding is the problem. And so if you go into an organization and you ask the leaders and the team there, okay, who's actually your buyer? Not just of the kind of the tactical use case, but who's the buyer of the thing you want everyone to sell? Because everybody's got something bigger they want people to sell now. Who's the real buyer of that? Who owns the problem? Who owns that strategy? And then if you ask those people like, "Hey, what are the KPIs of that person?" You will get most of the time you'll get crickets. You beyond like make money, save money. It's like, no, like what are the initiatives? What are the KPIs? Like what are they working on? How does what you do fit into their world, not the other way around? This is where we typically start. And a lot of what we're doing early stage is we do like a maturity diagnostic inside an organization, especially large organizations, to look at how the functions work together and then how well they believe they're actually delivering value against the customer buying experience. This is like a huge eye opening thing to actually look at who's pointing fingers at who, where the prioritization is different, what different people feel they're good at or they'd invest in. That allows you to arm yourself for change management. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing is whatever you if you're cooking up the strategy, you know how to get through the actual change management piece and then be able to execute. And most people don't anticipate that. They just go out with like, here we're going, right? And then let the leaders down, try to figure out how to get their teams there. So we do that. We do interviews with customers, we do interviews across the organization. What we're really trying to look at in general is you have a huge opportunity moving the middle of your sales team or your customer facing teams. And so, generally, not a secret, if you study the top 20% and you figure out not what the top 2% are doing, take the top 2% out. And that's the problem. Most people look at the top performers, the top of the president's club, and they say, everyone, oh, that was the best deal we ever did. Like, let's have them tell their story. Everyone go do that. If you look at the average thing on the top 20, and then you move that to the middle 60, and you can start to replicate the process, the skills and behaviors, the execution, and the stories and the other things like what are the stories they tell? What are the indicators they look for to actually qualify if a company's ready to buy or not? Not the sort of BANT or the other kinds of qualification. It's like there's these other things that are more inherent about the customer strategy and how well they're actually aligned to where we want them to go. And so we unpack that. We unpack that across a wide data set across companies. But then importantly, we look at each company and we start to determine not like rip everything out and put something in, because we've seen that does not work. That's what most people they change sales methodologies like it's religion, and it totally fails. What you need to do is say where you need to know where people are now and what are the things we want to keep and build on so that that actually is like it's like organ donor, it has to be like it has to mesh or it gets rejected, and then you bring in the outside best practice and accelerate from there. So that's kind of that's a high level of like how our process is probably different from others.
Eh, just a quick follow-up, and then you said something interesting I'll ask about here in a minute as well. But when you're looking at that engagement, um, how are you differentiating between, "This is how I'm gonna engage with a smaller company that I'm working with," versus you mentioned a larger company, more matrixed. You have a, kind of assessment that's different. Does it change, or is it pretty much the same?
I think you have to just it's just practicalities, right? You know, in the large organization, you're gonna change it's gonna be slow to get change to happen. So you're gonna do your best, but you're gonna be aware that you're gonna have to come back. It's gonna have to be iterative, and you're not gonna have to you're not gonna expect people to change. There's gonna be more entrenched ways of doing things, and you're gonna have to set their expectations, right? Like I think we're much more open with clients around like, hey, like if this is not going to work in the way typically you think, like let's anticipate all the things that are going to go wrong because things are going to go wrong versus everyone who would try to pretend that everything's going to be perfect and then the second something goes wrong, the relationship is broken with the client. In smaller organizations, you can get everybody in a room. You don't need to do an assessment. You don't need to do a diagnostic. It's like what people do we need to talk to in what format, and then ultimately like the challenge with smaller organizations is you can't build the infrastructure to do some of the things like manager coaching as a example, right? Like managers have to be able to take the strategy, translate it to the field. They have to understand how to reinforce the process. They also have to understand how to coach and develop their teams. Now, with a large company, we can do a whole manager effectiveness program with like training and one-on-one coaching and all that infrastructure. With a something coming out of a founder-led startup where there's like a VP of sales, but there's like one or two salespeople. It's like, yeah, like realistically at the pace you're moving, like what can you do with and maybe you've got one RevOps person, you have no enablement team, maybe, and it's like, realistically, what are the things we can do when people are doing different jobs to make this practical? And so you're stepping like one foot in front of the next. And so we work differently, in those organizations. And the funny thing is like the smaller ones, obviously, they always want to sprint, right? They wanted to like, let's just go through everything as fast as humanly possible. But what doesn't change about small and big organizations is human beings' ability to learn and change is not different, right? Yeah, startups move fast and break things, but at the end of the day, like if you do too much too fast and you don't have time to like practice, like do things wrong, form the right habits, like that stuff, you really do need to have more discipline. So I think that's more the problem with small organizations. They want to move too fast. They are unrealistic about like the time it takes for people to change. And then they don't want to, do it consistently. They just want it to be like, oh, okay, so 3 weeks, we're done. We're now awesome at everything. And like then from what do we do next after that? It's like, no, 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 no. Like you have to have discipline. You have to lean in as leaders. You have to develop your people. And you can't just kind of automate that, right? Like throw a tool at it and then suddenly, everybody's adopting it and doing it every day.
Yeah. No, it's so true. You said something earlier, and I just wanna maybe spend a second on that. You've mentioned how it's important that you don't necessarily focus on the top 2% in sales. I thought that was interesting because when you see like stories that a company shares, it's their biggest wins, and they're often from their best salespeople. So tell me a little bit more about what you mean by, okay, actually look at that next 20%, that tier, so you can replicate it and bring up kind of that middle, what, 20 to 60%. Tell me a little more about that. I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed well, the first thing I think of when you said that is like that's like the LinkedIn way of teaching, right? It's like on LinkedIn, everyone's saying like, "Oh, I did this, so everybody should be able to do it. Oh, I pick up the phone and I had this conversation. I convert 8 meetings a day, so it's easy. Everyone should be able to do it." Like, first of all, it's bullshit, right? Pardon my French. But then also, it's like that's not. There are not things you can replicate in most of what the top 1% people are doing, right? And that's also the problem with those people then becoming managers because typically those people are not the kind of people who know how to then translate that and scale it for a team and actually be, the coaches and the leaders. And yeah, it's just like do my way and it should work for everyone. So we learned that pretty early. The first thing, the first project I did when I joined CEB back in 2006, way back, was a we did a study called Shifting the Performance Curve. And it was like this riveting study on how do you analyze the time spent of high performers and what's customer facing time, what's non customer facing time, what are the things they're doing. And some of the things were obvious, like high performers were spending a lot more time preparing before they go in front of a client. Easy things like this, but like the unpacking was quite interesting. This was before people really had CRM. Like doing the things it does today. So these kinds of studies were quite interesting. But then we looked at like, okay, well, how do you model high performance? And the first thing that we learned is that everybody goes out and talks to the top salespeople, and they're like, hey, okay, great. Like, all right, they did this, they did that. Let's put them on the stage. When you start to learn, when you actually, after years of analyzing competency, skills, behaviors, knowledge of salespeople, and we've done more of that work, I think, than anyone on earth, when you start to realize that there's things that are replicable and there's things that aren't. And so, whereas most of the top salespeople, they may have amazing charisma or like just be able to sort of run through brick walls in a single bound and jump and do things like the top athletes can do. Like, but yeah, but everybody's not born with those skill sets. You have to then start to isolate down to like what's the knowledge, what's the skills, and what's the behaviors. That's one of the things when Timur was doing that study that became known as the Challenger study. It was looking at, I think it was, geez, I'm going senile at this point. I've talked about this so many times, but it's about 40 attributes that we looked at that everyone thought like all of these attributes are important to be a high performer. Yeah, skills, knowledge, behaviors. And we said, that's great. These all sound like really, really important attributes. But at the end of the day, you can't train or teach or coach people on, 27 things, let alone like 40 plus things, right? And so we actually spent that study was really looking at like what are the specific attributes that you need to be better at that are scalable, teachable things that you could then go and you can actually build and teach, the general average salesperson who would want to learn. And so that was the whole part of that study. But the first thing we learned was do not try to demoralize people by making them replicate the natural born talents of somebody, because it's not like you can teach anybody to dunk a basketball, right? Like if you're born 5'5", like it's not there's nothing you're gonna do. Like I'm like over 6 feet. I'm never, like I don't know if I could be trained, but I think you know what I mean. Like it's like that's what you need to separate from, because it does actually work the exact opposite way. That we have so many stories of people looking at somebody and saying, I'm never gonna be able to do what that person does. And so what do they do then? They just go back to like hiding in the shadows. And that's the opposite of the change you want.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it. I mean, I was playing basketball. I'm not tall. That was never my goal to dunk, but I still could play, and I could play pretty okay, you know. So I agree with you. It's probably more about how you drawing the line at the bottom and you elevating this bottom up from the kind of the bar instead of looking like, hey, everybody should be like the top performer because that's how you scale,
Yeah, and these days, I
especially.
mean, top performers are a lot of organizations are 7 times better than the core. We've looked at so many organizations, I'm sure you've done these analyses where it's like, "Oh, wait, 80% of your people don't get past like 40% on against target." It's like, okay, this gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and instead of like what's going to happen in a lot of tech organizations is they're like, "Oh, well, okay, let's narrow down to these superstars, and then these people don't matter, and we'll sort of automate or replicate like we'll do something to like take all the easy stuff away and just narrow everything down to like superstars." That is not a scalable strategy, and that is not realistic. And so out of that group, there's maybe 20% of every group that for skill or will reasons is not going to get better. And that's just too bad, and hopefully it's on the lower side of that. But the middle 60, like they absolutely, if they have the desire, and that's another question generationally, I think these days we won't touch around like, do they have the same desire to like put in the hard work and the discipline to like get better and better and better, because sales is all about mostly rejection, right? But yeah, like that's what we've learned is like you can absolutely do the things high performers do. If you practice it, it just might be a little harder for you or not come as naturally.
Yeah. No, that's all, and I could talk about that all day, especially when you start talking about like people and psychology and how to how to bring up those that have the potential and maybe it's a bit of a skill gap or some knowledge gap. So I love the way you frame that. One more question around the maybe some of the tactics. When you're looking to kind of fix a problem, so you've done that initial assessment, you've locked in on what the problem is. Tell me a little bit about like, how or when you realize, okay, this is not a software problem. This is actually a skills issue that you have or something else. Like, how do you go through that process and then, at the end result, like land on, okay, this is what it is. And then how do you then go implement that change?
Yeah, so if you mentioned like whether it's like a software problem, obviously a lot of people invested in a lot of technology to solve for sales gaps. And even in the last couple of years with AI adoption, I think we've all seen the number of studies that show how low adoption is. And so I think part of it is like if you look at Gong, is one of the greatest examples of a wonderful tool that almost nobody that I've ever seen actually uses or uses to its full potential, let's say. How many organizations over the last several years, I know they're significantly enhanced their capabilities, but if you look at the main use case of like, if a manager would sit down because they can't travel around everywhere and be everywhere at once, right? If they could actually listen to sales calls, how much better could they make their sales team, right? If you go like the original use case for this software, and yeah, of course, the Gong has all these other bells and whistles, but I think there was this like part where it jumped the shark, where it's like, oh, wait a minute, and I heard the CEO of Gong was talking about this at SaaStr one year, where basically you could see that it was moving away from like, oh, well, most when we go into organizations, most managers are never reviewing those calls, let alone having coaching conversations about them. So what happened? Oh, well, now we have AI coaching, right? So then it's like, oh, okay, well, now the managers don't even need to review the calls. Now we can just give you like summaries and then even have AI coaching those salespeople. Well, I'm not saying that like it arguably one of the best tools in that category, and certainly, there's a premium for it but you should use all the different things it can do. But if you look at organizations and look at performance, do we see that these tools are actually solving the problem that managers are supposed to solve for and developing their teams and actually scaling and executing on strategy? No, right? These tools are great for reinforcing things that are being put in place and driving forward and then practice, practice, practice. But if the managers aren't doing those fundamental things and then you're just band-aiding it over, then that is a significant problem you need to solve. Because ultimately you're not going to have technology really executing your strategy for you. They can, yeah, like it's like if you have the way I think about it is if you had a football team and each player was practicing on their own and then would just show up for the game, right? Using their tools, using whatever it is. The coaches, the leaders of that team, they're like that team has to work together to execute the strategy of that business with a specific type of customer with a specific solution. And so that's where I think the difference between it's a tech problem or it's a execution or a skill problem. I think most of the time what you have is poor tech adoption, poor leadership, and then it turns into this sort of, inconsistent mess, which is why you have this gap where high performers, like there's some people who will just figure this out and get ahead, but the rest of the team is left far behind.
That reminds me a little bit of a conversation about losing weight. When somebody who is obese is going and asking people like what I should do to lose weight, and everybody knows what it is. But I think what that person is expecting is just to have some silver bullet, like a one pill to take, and that somehow magically will just start, losing weight. I mean, it's always the same, right? Eat healthy and exercise more for probably majority of the society. And everybody knows it. You don't have to go to obtain some magical program for you. You don't have to, have some magic, workout program. That is nonsense. I mean, yeah, there's some differences, there's some preferences, but that's not something that will trigger you losing weight. I think I compare this to what you just said because I agree with it. Everybody knows what the sales manager should do, but they're trying to avoid this because it's a tedious thing and it's not helping them immediately close more deals. But that's part of the job. Now, I think it also go back to something else you said earlier, is that not always a good sales performer is a good sales manager. And I think that level of sensitivity is impacting their ability to execute on these things that you outlined. I agree 100%. Everywhere I was, it was the same problem. Everywhere I was working for or everywhere I was consulting, it was the same problem. And guess what? When I was a sales manager, when I was leading a sales and post-sale team for one of my customers trying to restructure the team, that was the one thing that I was consistently doing on every single day. I was listening to the calls. And the picture started to emerge from it. It was just immediately, where's the problem, what we should do, and you start creating even a simple spreadsheet telling people what they should be avoiding, what is a good practice in those situations. That's already an improvement. People don't want to do it. People don't want to put the work around losing weight for weeks and months because they feel just great bitching about it and looking for a pill. And that's that
Zach,
pill
should
is
we
the
tell
synonym
him?
of
Should we
yeah.
tell him there's a pill now?
No, even that has a
I hear
no.
you though.
No,
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 I'm
but no, no,
kidding.
but no,
Oh,
no.
the
You
Super
you
Bowl
want you want you
commercial.
want to take you want to take it. I'm happy to take it to the next level. Even that
No.
pill has a side effects. So
It
think about
does.
this. You stop taking a pill. If you stop taking GLP because that's what you mean. At some point, your habits will kick in. Why? Because you don't want to put the work in. You never actually did put the work in except taking the pill. So guess what? Guess what? You're gonna put those pounds back.
Often.
Yeah, and AI is the new pill for everything, right? So that
That's so true.
and
Yeah.
so I mean that's part of what we try to work with is scaling things that work and scaling knowledge that you have is great, making it easier and faster. High performing, experienced salespeople can do is they can grab and search the information they need to show up and look super smart in front of a client. But the average salesperson, especially less experienced salesperson, can do a search, get a bunch of information, have no idea what it means, and then blab something out in front of the customer. And as soon as they realize they're out of their depth, they go back to like what? They go back to either being super reactive or doing the demo, doing the pitch. And so this is, I think, we're starting to get lulled into this trap where we're being forced to outsource part of the things that we actually were okay at doing. And we're having this crutch of AI. Like I know it happens to me now. It's like there's things I used to find easy that now are hard because I'll put the thing like, oh, this email's almost right. I'm gonna see how much better it can be. And I'm like, I don't know if that's right. And I spend more time. I think this is obviously people my age, you can claim like we're slower at picking up technology, but at the end of the day, the fact that the second you start using these things for different use cases, we're going to expand on them. You stop thinking and doing those things that you need to know how to do. Now, when we get to the point where differentiation, creativity, these become so much more important again, after everyone realizes, like, wait, everything we're doing is the same, everyone's going to want to go back to like, well, and I think we're going to fall back in that place where it's like, well, wait a minute, like thinking this way, doing these basic things we used to do, now we can't do them without AI, and that's a big problem. And there may be people who can break through and innovate right away, but the second you innovate one thing with AI, it's so easy to copy and everyone's doing it. And then suddenly you're destroying, it's not getting better at the game is being destroyed for everyone. And then we have to, I think a lot of those things will go back to the fundamentals, right? So getting back down to, do I understand this customer? Can I make a connection with this human being? Can I build trust with them? Can I be thoughtful about my approach? And that's going to make me also differentiated. These are the things we're going to lose if we're outsourcing the thinking and the strategy and the execution to tools.
Yeah, I think we're forgetting about the function of the tool. I think I like to look at the tools as an enhancement of my abilities, not a complete replacement. Because once you replace it, and everybody does that, to your point, that if we reach that inflection point, I think what we risking here is the customer's numbness. So I was thinking about is where this AI SDR goes. AI SDR can do hundreds of calls without asking me for a salary increase, without being tired, without being having emotions essentially, et cetera, et cetera. So if everybody will hire those, nobody will pick up the fucking phone because everybody knows it's a BS. So I think it will be short-lived in a sense in the way we defining this today. It might work better in the future because you know that tool can be selective, can be more analytical, can pick things that actually has a specific data behind and is just triggering something that is having a high propensity to pick up the phone, buy, intent, whatever it is. I get it. That can be optimized. But as a general rule, I think it will be much, much harder to do this. Um, and yeah, they'll put to your point, yeah, something might actually go back to the more analog and more human based stuff. But on that note, I actually have a question for you. Do you think there's notion that a lot of these VCs and some of these companies they're claiming as a goal um, is possible? A lot of them are talking about self-driving revenue engine in go-to-market. Do you think this is even feasible? Is it even plausible? Possible, maybe, but I don't think it's a
You mean fully automated?
yeah.
And I think I'll try to separate my personal, what I hope is true, from like just the science of what we've been seeing. I think at the end of the day, like what have I really been looking at? It's like how, at the end of the day, how do customers make decisions? That we've studied that more than anything. How do they decide I need to do something differently? What are the options I should be considering? What are my needs and requirements? And then who are the people that I actually should be truly evaluating in that buying process? Now, you could easily make the argument that there is a certain set of transactional needs that will be procured in an automated fashion. And for automated procurement, some of that's going to go out the door as far as like all the things about how do you actually impact human beings making decisions. And so if you're in a space that's going to be highly commoditized and it's going to be bots selling to bots, right? Like reverse auctioning and all this other stuff. But and that's going to probably be uncomfortably high, that bar where it's going to go in the coming years. It might go back down again when people realize like, holy crap, like actually we weren't making thoughtful decisions doing it that way. And also the plays on both sides might not be healthy for either company, but that will happen, right? And just like the people that typically, if you're a salesperson who is in a highly automatable position or a CSM or something like that, like absolutely. But as you get up into enterprise sales, which is where a lot of the focus of our time is on, like more complex enterprise sales, and arguably the complexity creeps in over like 20,000 or maybe even 10 these days. What is complexity? Multiple human beings involved in that decision. And when you have multiple human beings involved in that decision, there is inherent friction beyond three people touching a decision. There is friction between those people, and they tend to make poor decisions and they tend to be dysfunctional. And what can help them be more functional is not more information and automation. What can help them more, it's the skill set of the best sales teams are like, how do we help them be a more high functioning buyer, right? How do we get them to make better decisions? And at some level, there's going to be a differentiation between those who try to automate and run the play and pipeline in their process and try to strip that down. And they're going to find out that unless their play is like, we're going to be the cheapest providers there is, or there's some other strategy, like we just gonna have more advertising dollars than anyone else, and so we're just gonna fill the funnel and we're just gonna have low conversion. But for most organizations, they're gonna start to realize, like, holy crap, new business is so hard in the future to come by. It is so expensive to acquire new business that when we have opportunities, our conversion rates have to be super high. And that means we're going to have the absolute best buying experience and sales teams who work together through that whole process to actually execute against that high quality business. And I think that's why you see everyone pivoting to this platform play as well. It's like they realize like, oh, we're going to have to go deeper with less organizations to be successful going forward, and then maybe through acquisition to grow. And so that's where I think so VCs and PE, the problem with their strategies are that they are building their strategy based on the fact that the wide majority of companies they acquire will fail. And so they can run playbooks with organizations that 90% of the time are going to fail. And so, and then you get these leaders that are like, no, no, but they've done this before. They know what they're doing. It's like, no. What if somebody came with advice and said, and they were training somebody to run a marathon and they say, like, well, 90% of the people I train actually have heart attacks and die. Would you, well, who would hire that person, right? But that's not the world we live in. So like there it's not a choice necessarily, right? Because most people who are and VCMP are different. But at the end of the day, like this is where I think like we work with PE VC back companies all the time. And what you're trying to do is say, let's realistically play this out and realistically see like what it how is let's play chess, not checkers. You have seen a lot of organizations trying to trim down staff. I just saw there's an article out today about the regrets a lot of these tech companies have had of replacing developers with AI, as an example. And I think there's a lot, like you can see how much regret there is in a lot of the tech spend in the last few years that has led to no productivity gains, right? Efficiency and productivity are not the same thing. And this is so I per your question, which is maybe a leading question, like I think yes, if you want to be a transactional commoditized business, great, go ahead, do it, and you'll have capital efficient, very slight growth. But if you're trying to actually build a meaningful growth business and actually do something important with your clients, you're going to have to go the other direction. And yes, then also figure out what technologies you can bring in that are going to make it, like you said, augment what your best people are doing. And that's the perfect blend, I think, for at least the next 2, 3 years.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about Adam. Also, that there's an evolution process that will change. So I think a lot of these startups will literally start with this very high efficient um, uh, businesses being somewhat automated to prove the value before they start going up and expanding. Um, yeah, that was a somewhat the process in the past, and somebody can argue, okay, that didn't change. Well, true, but I think now it's going to be more of the kind of proving stage in their evolution before the investors come in and say, hey, we're going to give you the Series C to go beyond and to enterprise, right? Because we need to see all these things are actually playing out pretty well. There's a product market fit. You have a consistent expansion on the user conversions to premium, et cetera, right? So I feel like that would be a little bit more institutionalized than it was before in on the kind of the entire evolution of the startup. It won't be only pre-seed, seed, and so on and so on. There'll be something more than that. Um, and one more thing, I think you mentioned this. It's the competition will be enormous. So to scale a startup will be harder than this to start a startup.
Yeah, the barriers to starting a company are so low now. It's frightening. It's exciting, but I think this is it's really interesting because where we think about the future in this environment, like the concept of trust becomes so like brand, like trust between individuals, but like the trust of a brand, right? Companies are going to have to pivot a lot. They're going to be able to do new things quickly, and with so many upstarts that are appealing and shiny, but actually people are going to get burned so many times by these companies that I think this idea that building, being trustworthy, being objective, having people actually understanding how to get you, to your outcomes and not just get you on, like, oh, we'll just run a pilot. You just got to get you onto the platform. I think like that's going to go away. PLG is going to be important, and we talked about that sort of more transactional space. But I think the place where I see a lot of excitement is if you're able to clean up your data, if you're able to understand your customers better, and then you're able to actually look at, especially like I think that you talked about intent data on the front end. I think there's really interesting things going on there, and there's a lot of skepticism too. But with your customer, if you can monitor what your customer's doing, how your customer's doing it, and be really more of understanding where can I be available, when should I be available to them. Like technology should help us a lot to be in the right place at the right time for existing customers where we have access to more information and we should be able to use that to retain and grow those accounts. And I think that's an exciting space because and there should be a customer centric aspect of this. Whereas a lot of the stuff on outbound generation is more about just like, we don't care what happens to the people we don't talk to. With existing customers, it's like, yeah, like we really need to hold on to these people. Truly, that's for a tech company like that, the retention right now, like that is the real valuation of a company right now. But then what do you do with that trust? Like, what do you do with that customer knowledge? Those are the companies that are going to succeed. So I guess, and I know this is much more your world than mine, like how people are actually getting the right kind of data and analyzing that data and then using it to activate the way they're engaging to drive value. Like I see some pretty cool applications there.
Yep. I agree. Um, that's where the future goes. Um, Before we wrap up, I have a few questions for you. Um, so looking at the market and speak about the tools
Mhm.
or companies in general, like what are the two companies in the SaaS or other space that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, tools. I mean, I can talk about like we have some partners that we work with because we think they're great at what they do. And so I probably should mention some of those folks as a starting point. There's a company called EBSA that was acquired by Fullcast recently, and so there's some really good, and there's a lot of companies in the revenue intelligence space, but I think the idea that you can sort of analyze how your team's engaging with customers, what's differentiating high performers using this kind of data, and then also look at relationship health, like the touch points with the customer, what's the difference between a healthy deal and not, and do actually like revenue intelligence as a service, right? So that's how we work with them with some clients where we'd be able to do like an analysis, using so that's a EBSA I think is a great tool. Also, I think they're doing some great work with they've put out a research study with Pavilion, that community that they take their data and they also have access to a lot of headcount through that, and so they're able to share some pretty good insights. So we love research, being the science nerds we've been for the last 20 years. So I'll mention them. Um, and I guess I'll mention another company that we actually we work with, and it's a Barcelona company. So I'll give some props since I'm based here. It's a company called they're now called Enginy. They used to be called Genesee, but we work with them. I think there's a lot of it's a very very crowded space as far as platforms that sort of take in data from different sources, right? All of them have data from a lot of the same, but a lot of different sources. And then how do you put that into orchestrating all the different sort of mechanisms that you need to do your outbound and to do that for a team? And it's a tool that's I think really good for startups and scale ups. And so we've looked broadly at the market, and that just seems to be one that's growing really fast. And props to them being based here and taking the world by storm. So that'll be two I'd go with.
Okay, awesome. Good examples. We're gonna look them up. I mean, Epsta, I know, Fullcast as well. Um, so I think I've been in touch with them in the a while ago. So is there any book or podcast besides this one that you would recommend?
Yeah. So first of all, I would recommend everybody Market Genius. They're already here though, but great
Who
podcast.
are they? Who are they?
Uh,
I love it.
they so yeah, so books, podcast. I'm yeah, let's see. I mean, obviously I still go back to Challenger Sale, Challenger Customer, uh Jolt Effect, like great books coming from that CEB lineage. And really looking at the science. And I think a lot of those things over the years are like what's old is new again. There's definitely a lot of nuance to that work. I'm actually going to be this is the recent one I've been reading. Is good enough good enough? a friend of mine, David Brock, real smart, entertaining guy. I'm going to be actually interviewing him on my podcast next week, I think. It's taking a look at this mindset, and so we defer to like how maybe people go into sales these days like aren't willing to kind of cut their teeth the same way. So he looks at this challenge of what I would think of as like you're not exactly phoning it in, but like you don't have this like how do we get people back to this excellence mindset? So I'd say that's if you have that challenge with your organization, that's a book to take a look at. So yeah, there's a couple ones that are front of mind.
All right, this is awesome. Appreciate the link to that. We're definitely gonna check this out as well. And the last thing I have for you is like, what are the top three tips for a CRO that is planning to scale their organization?
Top three tips would be, I mean, I think it boils down to three things. Most people try to come in an organization, especially if you're new to the role. And I think you try to tweak one thing or another thing to solve for what ultimately are some pretty big execution gaps in the organization. So, and if we look at, most teams are what at like 60% of goal on target on average these days. And so if you're in that situation, I'd say look at three things. I call them the mindset, the method, and the machine. Okay. So you've got your mindset problem, which is do we have a reason for our customer to change? Right? Do we have a good story for them to do the thing differently that actually is positioned towards our business model? And that's a customer centered culture. And it requires like a knowledge of what that story is, not your story, the customer story. I think you start there. And if you think like we don't, our teams really don't know what that story is, then good luck, right? Because all they're doing then is pitch. They're just pitching, and that's not going to work. The second thing is the method. Like, do you have a consistent way to understand how your customers are making their decisions and how you're driving value and becoming a better partner to collaborate that group of people on both sides of the table. And so that's something we spend a lot of time on. We call it building a bridge. And so that seems to be the difference between high performing teams is they actually know how the customers make those decisions and they partner with them in a different way. And I think the last piece is the machinery. It's the engine, right? Like you need to build skill building in human beings, right? Like changing behaviors is not an event. It's not an SKO. It's this is part of your culture. Like, how are we teaching our teams the skills to execute the things that I just described and doing that on an ongoing basis? Like, if you bring those three things into your organization, then you are going to have, three legs to the stool. Like, without the three of them, like one of them is going to collapse. And so I think being a little more thoughtful and strategic about how you approach that, and you can easily outmaneuver most of the teams out there, which are, I think a lot of them are like, they don't believe, right? They don't believe in what they're pitching. They don't believe they're going to hit their goals. They're not adding value. And a lot of people are in triage mode. Like you can outmaneuver those teams if you just take this more strategic approach.
I love it. I love it. I agree with everything you said about this. It's such a big component believing in what you do, and everything that you do actually matters. Um, so sales is indifferent in that regard. I appreciate that. All right, I think that's a good place to stop. That's it for this episode. I appreciate your time, sharing your thoughts, and your insights. So I hope we can do it again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been awesome chatting with you guys.
Yeah, thank you.